Hi, this is Mike Blume, Lesson 30, Endtime Bible Prophecy, and in this lesson I wish to discuss the 70 weeks of Daniel. Is the 70th week of Daniel still to come, or was it fulfilled consecutively following the 69 weeks? In Daniel 9 and 23, at the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee. This is Gabriel talking to Daniel. For thou art greatly beloved, therefore understand the matter, and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. In Daniel 9, we read of a period of time referred to as 70 weeks. The Lord gave this information to Daniel in answer to his prayer for enlightenment. Daniel considered the prophecies of Jeremiah, who spoke of Israel being captive in Babylon for 70 years. He sought the Lord because he was in the midst of that very period of time of captivity. In grief and sorrow over the plight of God's people, Daniel prayed a prayer of forgiveness for the people, confessing himself as among the whole who had sinned. He prayed and admitted that Israel deserved this judgment. Then he asked God to deliver them, as he delivered them from Egypt in generations past, according to the prophecy of Daniel, that after 70 years they would be set free. In verse 20 we read that after Daniel gave his prayer, Gabriel appeared during that prayer. It is interesting what Gabriel spoke to Daniel. Daniel was praying about 70 years of captivity prophesied by Jeremiah. But Gabriel spoke about 70 weeks determined upon Israel. Here's Jeremiah's prophecy in Jeremiah 25 and 11. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon, and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it perpetual desolations. Why did Gabriel refer to 70 weeks when Daniel was praying about 70 years? It seems that the Lord considered Daniel's request concerning the redemption from Babylon during the 70-year captivity and thought to reveal to Daniel an even greater, in fact the greatest, redemption that would ever come. This indicates that Israel's captivity in Babylon was like a microcosm of mankind's captivity in sin. Instead of 70 years, 70 weeks of years are the issue of the greater redemption. After 70 years, Israel was freed from Babylon. But after 70 weeks of years, that is, each week being 7 years, with 70 of such groups of 7, totaling 490 years, a great deliverance would occur. Jesus Christ would bring deliverance to Israel. It was at the time of the sacrificial evening offering that Gabriel came to Daniel. The evening offering typically represents Christ's sacrifice. That was the time when Gabriel was sent to answer Daniel's prayer. A sacrifice from Daniel had moved God to speak of the great sacrifice of deliverance to come through Jesus Christ. Here's the full prophecy in Daniel 9, verse 24 to 27. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Notice these 6 elements. And then we read, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, a commandment would be given to restore and build Jerusalem. Remember, Daniel was in captivity in Babylon. Babylon had destroyed Jerusalem. So there was going to be a commandment given to start rebuilding it again. And from that point unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 plus 62 equals 69. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. We read of 70 weeks being weeks of years or sets of 7, because the Hebrew word for week is like our English word heptad. It's a 7. It's not necessarily a 7-day period when it says week, because the Hebrew doesn't have anything to do with days. But it just means sevens, sort of like dozens means 12s. And so 77s would actually be the proper translation. So each of those 7s would be years, 7 sets of 7 years, or rather 70 sets of 7 years. After Israel escaped from Egypt under Moses' leadership, the people surveyed the land of Canaan for 40 days and returned in unbelief. God judged them to spend 40 years due to their lack of faithfulness in the wilderness. A year of wandering would be given for each day of searching Canaan. Because of unbelief, the Israelites were to wander for 40 years in the wilderness, a year for each day searching Canaan. Ezekiel also mentioned this principle in Ezekiel 4, verse 4-6. I've appointed thee a day for a year, a day for a year. Now, most understand that the first 69 weeks brought Israel to the advent of Jesus Christ. Everybody agrees with that. The first 69 weeks of Daniel's prophecy would bring them to the Messiah, the Prince. However, most depart from this point of belief and head into various directions of interpretations. At this point, they believe that God's time clock that clocked off 70 weeks stopped ticking at the end of the 69 weeks, although nothing in the text of Daniel assumes anything in that manner. Nothing exists in this chapter that indicates anything to do with stopping the so-called clock. They teach that the church age began and will continue until the rapture, when Israel begins offering sacrifices again in the temple, causing God to start the time clock ticking again and finish up with the 70th week, or the final 7 years. It's primarily from this assumption that people believe in a future 7-year tribulation period. So there is a gap, they say, between the 69th and the 70th weeks of Daniel's prophecies. And it is called the church age. The gap is called the church age. They reason that the church has nothing to do with God's dealings with Israel, so the clock must stop in order for the church to be born and exist, since the clock deals with Israel alone. After the church is removed, the time clock again ticks away, counting time for the period that God foretold he would deal with Israel. This means that there are some whom God never intended to become part of the church, and that he has 2 groups of people, the church and another group of natural Israel. And they claim God never works with the 2 at the same time. Such an idea is horrendously incorrect. In previous lessons, we showed you that the book of Ephesians chapter 2 distinctly, detailingly says that the church is for the reconciliation to God of both Jew and Gentile together in one body, the church. This dispensationalistic idea makes it as though the church is not God's ultimate purpose. It's just a parenthesis. The idea of a gap between the last 2 weeks of the 70 weeks of Daniel is called the futurist interpretation, or dispensationalist. The gap has been, so far they say, 2,000 years. The 70 weeks of Daniel in the entirety is 490 years, and they're saying there's a gap of 2,000 years in the midst of the last 2 weeks, greater than the entire 70 weeks of Daniel. It's ridiculous. Then there is the fulfilled interpretation. This understanding teaches that there is no gap whatsoever between any of the weeks, let alone the last 2 weeks. The series of weeks and years continued unbroken until they were totally fulfilled. There is no gap between the first half of the 70th week and the second half of the 70th week either. Some believe that the first half, or rather the last half of the 70th week, occurred in the 3.5 years leading up to AD 70. That's not true, and please understand this. The last half of the 70th week occurred hot on the heels of the first half, at the point of the cross. Count 3.5 years after the cross, and you have the end of the 70 weeks of Daniel. Let's continue in Lesson 31 about this very important subject.